A few months ago, our team of contract testers ran a pre-alpha version of our RPG. When Matt and I were going through their feedback, we read a note that made Matt say, "I was afraid of this. This is exactly the kind of feedback I hoped we wouldn't get." I knew what he meant. One of the core ideas of our game had created some big problems, and things we thought were settled were going to have to change. Hey folks, I'm James Introcaso. I'm the lead game designer at MCDM. That means I work with Matt to develop the rules for our RPG. You know, the RPG that's funding on BackerKit right now. Or, depending on when you're watching this, maybe the campaign is over and you can pre-order or buy the RPG. In all cases, there's a link in the thing. Anyway, some context for that testing story. We have a really great team of folks who run our game and send us a bevy of notes on everything from balance issues to typos to opinions about what's fun and what isn't. We call these notes bugs. And that's because that's what a video game QA team would call them. Many of the folks who work at MCDM also have worked in video games, including Lars, who runs the testing team here. But most bugs require a little thinking, a lot of text editing, and bada bing, you squish them. But some bugs are straight out of Starship Troopers. Whoa. The bug that raised a big alarm for us basically said, my players didn't want to end combat because it meant they could keep building up their resources. In fact, there were several bugs that basically were all variations on this idea. This was a huge problem. I'll explain how we got there. A lot of other RPGs are games of attrition. You start each day or adventure with all your resources. For instance, in D&D, a wizard starts the day off with all their spell slots. A barbarian starts with all their rages ready to rock. A monk has all their key points. While you adventure, your character's resources slowly run out until you rest and you get all or some of your resources back. The idea of needing to stop and rest to rebuild your vitality and other resources is great for a game about survival. Like, if you want to tell a story about crawling around in dungeons and betting a place is safe enough to lay low for 8 hours while hoping that the rats don't attack you because you've got no spell slots left, then a game of pure attrition is exciting and builds good tension. But our game isn't a dungeon crawler. I mean, it has dungeons, but it's not about tracking torches, ammunition, rations, and the weight of all your gear. It isn't a survival game. It's explicitly heroic, and things get decidedly less so if the heroes have to stop for a nap after fighting a few kobolds. A game of pure attrition doesn't really make a lot of narrative sense in a heroic game. Think about some of your favorite heroes. Does Doctor Strange run out of spell slots? Can Legolas only use so many Battlemaster fighter maneuvers during the Battle of Helm's Deep? He's using at least 3 superiority dice on the shield surf, right? Does Durick, the druid from Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, ever run out of wild shape? Yeah, that last one is Hasbro breaking the rules of a game they wrote to serve a more heroic narrative. Games of attrition also encourage players to hold back their coolest and most impactful powers for most of the game so that they can unload them on a boss, meaning that all encounters leading up to that main villain don't have a lot of tactical decisions. You're limited to the basics, and that fight with the boss is over in a flash as everyone goes supernova. So, not only is a game of attrition bad for a heroic game, it's bad for a tactical one too. Hey Matt, how would you describe our game in 4 words?
Tactical, cinematic, heroic, fantasy.
You can see why we felt that pure attrition didn't fit what we wanted for this particular game. Instead of starting the day with all your cool stuff, you'd instead gain that stuff by adventuring. In our game, each class has a unique resource that's tracked numerically and gained during combat. You spend that resource to activate different abilities and special attacks. The tactician gets focus, which they spend on abilities that grant their allies extra attacks. The shadow gains insight, which allows them to teleport and deal more damage. The conduit gains 2 resources, virtue, which they use to heal and buff their allies, and wrath, which they use to smite their enemies. When we got this bug, each class had some different ways of gaining their resource, but they all gained it at the end of each round of combat. This was a way to ensure that everyone built their resources evenly. At the end of the encounter, you keep any resources you generated and did not spend. You might be carrying some into your next encounter. So each battle gets more interesting the longer it goes, and the adventuring day sees heroes increasing in power. If you stop to rest, you regain your health, but your resources drop to 0. And since heroes can use resources to heal instead of resting, resting was only happening if everyone was low on health and resources. This incentivized players to keep going. That's what heroes do. They keep going. They don't stop for a quick nap when the world needs saving. Tell 'em, Musical Cap. Nice. But I bet you can see the problem with the rules we were testing here. Players were trying to artificially extend combat. They'd kill most of the enemies, then slog it out when things were safe, simply cornering the last foe and dealing as little damage as possible. While the battle technically continued, they could spend resources to heal and then build their resources to max before ending the fight with a final, merciful blow. In some cases, the director tried to end the fight by saying, okay, look, the fight is over, the villains surrender, and the players refused. The director could put their foot down and say, no, you can't gain any more resources from this. But that's not a position the game should be forcing the director into. We had unintentionally incentivized the players to extend fun encounters into slogs and get standoffish with their directors. Look. We went through a bunch of iterations to try and fix this issue. First, we instituted a written rule that allowed the director to call cut and end the battle early. Instead of battles happening until the last enemy falls, every encounter has different objectives the players must achieve to become victorious. While these rules were fun and encouraged more interesting encounters, ultimately, players could still artificially extend combat to gain resources by simply delaying the achievement of objectives instead of killing all the enemies. Poop! Well, those rules for objectives are still in the game, but we needed something else to solve our problem. We could just use the same attrition model a lot of D20 Fantasy uses, but that wouldn't create as heroic or as tactical a game as we'd like. Remember, we wanted combat encounters to be more interesting the longer they went on, and we wanted the players to feel challenged. And we wanted to give heroes a reason to press on adventuring. So, we pulled apart the system and put it back together about 7 different times. I don't have time to go through all the iterations, but here's ultimately where we ended up. In addition to heroic resources, there are 4 other key rules we've introduced to help the game support a heroic narrative. They're Victories, Recoveries, Resting, and Experience. First up is Victories. The heroes earn a victory when they successfully complete a combat encounter, solve a complicated trap or puzzle, get what they want in a negotiation, achieve a great success in a complex test, or complete any big challenge as determined by the director. Every hero has abilities they can use during combat that get better as they achieve more victories. For instance, a talent can knock back an enemy further with their telekinetic powers based on their victories, and the shadow can deal more damage with their devastating attacks. So, victories encourage players to get to the end of a fight more quickly, because they want that sweet, sweet prize. Victories also allowed us to have some classes lose their heroic resource at the end of a fight, because they don't really need them outside of combat. In fact, it doesn't make sense for these classes to be carrying around the heroic resource from battle to battle. Like, why would the focus the tactician builds in one battle carry over to the next that happens over an hour later? Why would the Beast Heart's companions still be frothing at the mouth with ferocity when the heroes stop to chat with the local druid circle? Victories allowed us to say, you can lose all your focus at the end of an encounter and gain a victory. Then, at the start of the next battle, you gain focus equal to your victories. So, I could start my first battle with 0 focus. I can still earn it during the battle. Then, I start the next battle with 1, and so on. In fact, you'll earn victories out of combat too, and those will help you in your next battle. So, I'm going into each fight with more resources to start, meaning that both the battles and the adventure get more interesting over time. When you rest, your victories reset to 0, inspiring you to keep going. Victories solved some of the issue, but there was still the problem of players wanting to keep a battle going to get free healing from resources so they didn't need to rest. We had a lot of discussions about this. Is a little bit of attrition okay for healing if the rest of the game isn't using attrition? Sure, Doctor Strange doesn't run out of spell slots, but he needs to take a breather after supervillains kick his butt. Resting to regain health makes narrative sense, even in a heroic game. In fact, resting to regain health was already part of the game. So resting to regain a resource that lets you heal, like hit dice in D&D, also makes sense. Plus, we needed to give players a reason to rest so that their victories didn't build to infinity. There are times that a hero needs to take an extended breather to avoid death in a narrative. Like when the Fellowship rests at Elrond's house, or the Avengers hide out on Hawkeye's farm. The answer to all this was Recoveries, a mechanic that is inspired by 4th edition's healing surges. Every hero has a limited number of recoveries they can use to regain health. Spend one, you regain about 1/3 of your health. That number could change in testing. We'll see. In combat, it's an action to use a recovery, but other classes, like the Conduit, can spend heroic resources to let you spend recoveries off turn. Resources don't let you heal more, just spend the recoveries you have to heal more easily. No real reason to keep the battle rolling into Slogsville if you can heal outside of combat. By the way, there are ways to heal without spending recoveries, but they're not related to heroic resources. Instead, it's by using a consumable magic item, like a healing potion. So how does resting work? Well, when you rest, you get back all your recoveries and lose your victories. But going to sleep for 6 to 8 hours doesn't count as a rest in our game. We don't want to make the players lose their victories to gain health and recoveries just because time has passed narratively. That should be a decision they intentionally make. We also don't think 8 hours is enough of an investment in a rest. In heroic stories, when the heroes break to rest, it's because they need to, and not because they'd like to get one of their 9th level spell slots back. The aforementioned stop at Rivendell and Avengers Wood Chopping Retreat are longer periods of downtime, where the heroes are really good and truly recuperating. In our game, a rest is a period of at least 12 hours where the heroes just chillax, sleep, eat, and restore themselves. The final piece of this is experience, and it's honestly the thing we've worked on the least at the time of recording. We're just now designing beyond the first level of the game. When you rest, the victories you lose are converted into experience. That way, the sting of losing the victories is abated a bit by the fact that your hero is moving towards advancement. It also means you won't randomly level up after a battle and then have questions like, if I wasn't at full health and then my max health increased, how does that affect my current health total? Hey, if I was poisoned when we level up, but now I'm immune to poison, does that mean that I just can't get poisoned again, or does it neutralize the current effect? We're working on the math of the system right now, but you'll likely have to rest at least a couple of times before gaining enough victories to convert to experience to level up. You can see how heroic resources, victories, recoveries, rest, and experience all work together to help create a heroic narrative. I hope you liked it. We certainly do. Don't forget to check out the game itself. Link in the thing. There's also a link to our Patreon where you can follow along with in-depth blogs about the development and exclusive Q&As with Matt and me. Thank you so much for watching. I freaking love working on this game and sharing it with all of you. In the meantime, keep on rolling.